Have you ever felt the chilling grip of fear in the middle of nowhere? In today's video, we're diving into 3 spine-tingling Reddit stories that unfold in the most isolated and eerie locations. These real-life encounters will make you question what or who might be lurking just beyond your sight. Before we jump into these terrifying tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more hair-raising stories that will keep you up at night. Let's get started. I came on here to share a story that my dad recently told me, one that he hasn't told anybody about up until now. Quick backstory here. My dad is a retired park ranger, if that's what you even call it. He worked for the National Park Service up until about 3 years ago. His usual tasks involved taking people on tours along the Appalachian Trail, maintaining the forestry and the wildlife habitats of the animals that live there. This story goes back to the summer of 2003, when my dad and a colleague, we'll call him John, were sent out to try and locate an adult elk, a particular male named Billy, who was usually very tame and was often found close to houses. But Billy hadn't been seen for over a week, and apparently this was very unusual for him. So my dad was dropped off along the trail, whilst John took the truck and drove further down in order to try and locate Billy. They had been searching all day for him, and this was the last stop of the trek, as there were only a few hours of daylight left. So, as the story goes, my dad had been walking along the trail for a little over an hour when he heard a disturbance in the distance, off to his left. He could hear the snapping of tree branches, and he decided to follow where the noises were coming from, all in the hopes that it could be Billy the elk. As he got closer, he said he began to smell a foul odor and instinctively knew that it was some sort of dead animal. He was right. As he emerged through the bush, laying on the ground in a small opening of trees was a carcass of a large elk. He could see by the tag on one of the ears that it was Billy. However, he was nearly immediately shocked by the condition that the animal was in. Billy had been severely mutilated. His eyes and tongue were now gone, his throat torn out, and his stomach had been ripped open so that the intestines were now protruding onto the forest floor. He also noticed that little chunks of flesh had been bitten from the torso. In addition, the entire right front leg was missing. My dad reasoned that the animal had been attacked by either a black bear or a large pack of coyotes, as nothing else would tackle a fully grown adult elk. However, even this seemed strange, because elk were usually too big for even apex predators to try to take down. What disturbed him even further was the way in which the animal had been mutilated after death. This is something that my dad even made a point of saying, that he had never witnessed anything like this before, that in nature, it would be very unusual for predators to mutilate a corpse in such a way. Feeling unnerved by this discovery, my dad radioed John and told him that he had located Billy before giving him his approximate location. John had told him that he had wandered off the beaten track and that it would likely take him around an hour to get back to where the truck was parked and drive back to my dad's location. So to that, my dad was told to wait where he was until John got back to him. It was nearly dark at this point, and my dad remembered beginning to feel very unsettled. He had a flashlight with him and bear spray, but noted that he still felt vulnerable while out there alone in the forest. After around 15 minutes or so, he heard the same noises that he had heard earlier, much closer now. As he was off the trail, he would hear footsteps and the occasional growl of something hidden within the thick bushes straight ahead of him. He said that every so often he could hear slow, heavy breathing and the snapping of branches as whatever it was paced around the forest. He began to get the feeling that he was being watched and worried that the coyotes, or perhaps even a bear, was now stalking him. He said that every so often he would wave his flashlight in the direction of the disturbance and yell out, doing what he could to try and scare off whatever it was that was watching him. But the noises still persisted, and this seemed to aggravate the creature. Luckily, the animal never came any closer or revealed itself to him, simply pacing around in the darkness and letting out the occasional growl. Just over an hour later, the truck pulled up along the trail, and my dad could see, to his relief, that John was now following the flashlight to where my dad now stood. The arrival of another person must have spooked the harasser, as my dad had noticed that he still heard the crunching of leaves and the breaking of branches, but they were now moving quickly away from them. My dad told John what had happened, and the man reasoned that it may have been a bear and that they probably shouldn't hang around. Together, they wrapped the corpse in a cloth and quickly managed to haul it back to the truck. My dad said that just as they were getting ready to leave, curiosity overcame him, and he decided to walk over to where the sounds had been coming from just moments before. John got out as well, and the two of them scoured the area. Behind a fallen log, they found the half-chewed leg of the dead elk, along with a number of discarded candy and chocolate bar wrappers, along with a small length of rope. Further back into the tree line, they found a pair of latex gloves covered in blood, as well as human shoe prints leading away from them. Near to the shoe prints, they discovered the remnants of a small fire and even a comic book. This flat out terrified my father. The realization that it had been a person that had mutilated the elk, that had been watching him from the bushes and growling, so much so that he and John had agreed to never mention the encounter to anyone. My dad has told me that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what he saw that day, and he still struggles to comprehend what the person was doing out there in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, how they had managed to kill the elk, and what their intentions were towards my dad. We relocated from the area in 2005 and now reside near Richmond, Virginia. My dad hasn't been back, and I said that he will never walk the Appalachian Trail again. I can't blame him, to be honest, because I've never been out there, and thanks to my dad's story, I won't be stepping a foot out there anytime soon. When I was younger, each summer and almost every new year, my family would pack the car up and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems on the road until one particular trip when I was 8 years old. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas at around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning. So at around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things began to get weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and a half, and still had a few more hours to drive, and I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was going on around me, because I didn't really have the skill to fall deeply asleep in the car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her loud and clear. "Miguel, that car behind us, it's been on us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car, shrugged off my mother's tension. "A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Rosa or another city before leaving it," he said, leaving it at that. Despite my dad's reassurance, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window, although we got tired of this pretty quickly. After a little while longer on this road, I hear my mom again, only more in a hushed whisper. "He's getting closer." In response to my mother's note, all of us kids turn to watch as the car inches closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, that car was practically pressed against the rear of ours, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. With another few hours until daylight, this was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense that we had ever experienced as a family. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like whoever the driver was knew that he was freaking us out and rather enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And he did, and the car that had been following us kept driving. I wondered just how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The cop came over and asked what was wrong, and that's when my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us, and the way it taunted us. The policeman took her claims seriously and told us of how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by both thugs and criminals. Then he offered to drive behind us for a while in order to ward off any unwanted attention and make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser right behind us, relieved. Until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw that same car that had been following us pulled over on the side of the road, only its front end was exposed from behind some sort of desert plant. I'm not a betting man, but I'd wager my last dollar that they were waiting for us. I also don't doubt that that police escort saved us from something terrible. Although what that was, I'll never know, and I'm just fine with that. This is a story that's really been bothering me lately, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. A few months back, I had this dream that brought back this memory that I had tried to suppress growing up, but as of recently, it's been weighing on me more and more. Growing up in or around 2005, on the edge of the suburbs, there was a large grove of trees and hills by some railroad tracks that led to a big forest about half a mile down from my house. When I was 9 years old, me and my neighborhood friends would ride our bikes to the railroad tracks and walk to the forest to go explore the random pieces of furniture and junk that were left in this particular area. We'd play card games, do homework, and hang with friends out there for about an hour or two, but never stayed for too long. There were small abandoned houses here and there in the forest that we did our best to stay away from, as one neighborhood friend, Michael, told me that there was a homeless man who lived in one of them, and if you saw him, you'd be best suited to run. So right off the bat, after hearing this, going near this house in the woods would be scary as hell. One chilly November afternoon, after school, I came home and dropped my backpack off at my house before immediately heading to the woods. My bike was broken, so I walked. Michael had told me at school that day to meet him in this open area of the forest to play Pokemon with him. This was something we'd frequently do growing up, just to pass the time, until our parents got home around 5 p.m., so it wasn't an unusual request. As I crossed the railroad tracks into the forest, I instantly felt this weird sensation, one that I hadn't felt at any time before. The feeling that you feel when someone is watching you. I looked all around, but couldn't see a soul, so I thought that maybe I was just spooked, as the rather overcast day was the perfect setting for eeriness anyway. Trekking through the autumn leaves scattered across the large wooded area, I came upon the big open area where I was supposed to meet Michael. Near to the area where we normally met was his notebook, open to a specific page. On that page was written, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here. I'll be back soon. Mike." I waited, but being alone, especially feeling like someone was watching me, made this particular moment very uncomfortable for me. However, I convinced myself that I was just being a wuss and decided to wait for Michael. I sat down, pulled out my Game Boy, and began playing. It wasn't too long until that sensation of being watched grew into utter paranoia. I kept frantically looking up from my Game Boy, checking my watch, to see how long I'd been waiting. I'd been sitting there for 30 minutes at this point. And now, it was beginning to get dark. That's when I heard some leaves crunch behind me. I looked in the direction of the sound and briefly saw a dark hooded figure peeking from behind a few trees, before dipping back behind them, almost as if they were hiding. My skin crawled, and I immediately jumped up from where I was sitting just to freeze in my tracks, staring. I screamed, "Hello?" to see if anyone was out there. I was quickly reminded that I wasn't alone when I saw this tall, dirty-looking hooded man peek back from around the trees. He nonchalantly called back, "Hey buddy," that's about all I needed to hear. I picked up Michael's notebook and ran for my life. I ran so fast that I barely had time to look back. However, I heard leaves crunching not too far behind me. It was the man, and he was now running after me, and as he ran, he was screaming for me to come back, and that he just wanted to talk to me. I began crying as I was running, thinking that this was exactly how those missing kids disappear. I ran and ran and ran, until I literally tripped over the railroad tracks and cut up my knees. At the point where I fell, Michael was just getting to the railroad tracks. He saw me, dirty, bloody, and crying hysterically. I screamed at him to run. Without question, we ran all the way home. As we finally turned around, the hooded man was nowhere to be seen. Once we left those railroad tracks, I last saw him standing in the woods, defeated that he couldn't catch me, or something. I told Michael everything, and from that point on, we never went back out to the woods again. Years later, around 2016, they bulldozed those woods, built a neighborhood there. We later found out from fellow neighborhood friends who were in the area that the same thing had happened to them growing up too. To this day, as I recount both childhood and adult life, this is probably one of the scariest stories that I've ever encountered. Wow, those stories were truly chilling. Which one sent shivers down your spine? Have you ever had a creepy encounter in an isolated place? We want to hear your thoughts and any eerie experiences you might have had. Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends who love a good scare. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our latest spine-tingling tales. Thanks for watching, and remember, the unknown is always closer than you think.